Earlier this week, I made a video discussing the announcement of the Retroid Pocket 5. And earlier last week, I made a video talking about the Retroid Pocket Mini. Well, now we finally have the specs released for both those devices. And I'm very, very excited to confirm that the rumors that we were hearing and that there was going to potentially be an OLED display and a Snapdragon chipset are in fact true. 3 important bits of information that we are still lacking. That's the amount of RAM these devices will have, when this thing will even release, and the price for these devices. For now though, let's just jump right into this and discuss what we do know. The Retroid Pocket Mini will have a 3.7-inch 960p AMOLED display with a 4:3 aspect ratio, which honestly sounds amazing. OLED displays on these retro handhelds have just been phenomenal. In particular, the 556 had an amazing display, and this surely should be very similar in terms of its quality because they're both AMOLED displays. And overall, those displays have been just remarkable for overall retro gaming look and feel. Just some of the best displays I've seen. It will also have a video output of 1080p 60Hz with a 4,000 mAh battery and with an overall weight of 215 grams, which is decently light. The zero bezels design that they have going for them now is very much akin to what we've seen with Iron Neo, kind of ripping them off. The device will have active cooling though, with a vent on the back. Should hopefully not be so hot that it makes your hands uncomfortable considering how small the device is though, so I keep an eye out for that. The Retroid Pocket 5 standard will have a 5.5-inch 1080p AMOLED display with a 16:9 aspect ratio. So a little bit more optimized for more modern titles. Think of Switch, widescreen GameCube and PS2 and Wii games. More, just modern stuff. Not exactly going to be super fun to play your standard 4x3 and 64, Super Nintendo, any of those kind of more vintage games. It will have once again, a 1080p 60 video output, a 5,000 mAh battery, and roughly 280 grams worth of weight. Not so bad, a little bit heavier than what the Mini has, so not terribly heavy still though. What we know about these devices so far is just some of the most important pieces of information. A glaring bit of information that we do lack for both these devices is the amount of RAM that they have, which can affect performance quite severely when it comes to higher end emulation. So what I'm about to say is just wild speculation. But I do have some reasonable expectations for this device. I feel like for the Retroid Pocket Mini, it's going to have anywhere between 4 to 6 gigabytes of RAM, especially if it's going to be around the $150 to $180 price point. I feel like that is a good way to keep the price down, especially because they're putting a whole Snapdragon chipset and having an AMOLED display. I feel like they want to try to cut costs somewhere, and I feel like the RAM is where they're going to do it. Similar thinking for the Retroid Pocket 5, trying to keep it around that $200 to $250-ish price point. They'll probably range between 6 and 8 gigabytes of RAM, very similar to what the original Odin had. The original Odin had a Snapdragon 845. That chipset was capable of performance all the way up until just the highest end PS2 and GameCube emulation perfectly. It was able to handle things like 3DS emulation, PS Vita emulation, even some Nintendo Switch emulation. Not the highest end stuff though, mostly the indie hits and some 3D titles. And you can currently find the original Odin Pro, which has 8 gigabytes of RAM, for about $200, and that's actually a fairly decent deal. One of the best devices around $200. On paper, the current Retroid Pocket 4 Pro with the D1100 should perform similarly, but in my experience, Snapdragon tends to have better software and driver support for these emulators, so I should expect, even though it shouldn't be that much, a decent increase in performance in comparison to the outgoing models. Not necessarily because it's just sheer from raw power, just that much more performant, but thanks to that software optimization and just the overall better driver support you find on Snapdragon chipsets. And if you're concerned about waiting for maybe a potential Pocket 5 Pro, well, I wouldn't hold your breath. The official Retroid account on Twitter officially confirmed that there will not be a Retroid Pocket 5 Pro. From what I can tell, there's going to be changing their approach. They're no longer going to separate two different handhelds with very similar names, separating them by arbitrary spec bumps and Pro nomenclature. They're going to have a Mini, which is going to be probably slightly less powerful than the full-size standard Pocket 5. Though it does confuse me why they didn't call it the Retroid Pocket 5 Mini, though I feel like that would have made a little bit more sense and make it feel a little bit more of like a family of systems rather than two separate systems that are releasing simultaneously. In my previous video discussing these handhelds, I had my hopes on maybe getting a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset, though that was a little bit of wishful thinking like I said in that video. It is a very powerful chipset capable of just insane performance, though probably would have been a little out of the budget for these handhelds. That would have certainly pushed this into the higher $200s, $300 price point. Seeing it come with a Snapdragon 865 makes a lot more sense, especially considering this chipset is from late 2019, so it's not terribly old, but it's just old enough that you can find them decently cheap. You can definitely find a ton of phones from that era with this same chipset at a great price, if you wanted to give the performance out a try before this device actually releases. Circling back to something I mentioned earlier in the video, the prices for the two devices are still not known, and I have my speculation, so take this with a pinch of salt, but like I mentioned before, I do expect the Retroid Pocket 5 to be around the $200 price point. $250 at the max, because at that point you start getting really close to Odin 2 prices, and as I mentioned before, the Odin 2 base model simply is one of the best devices around that price point. It's going to be pretty hard to beat. And for the Retroid Pocket Mini, I would hope it's around the $150 price point, because at that price point, it could be hyper competitive with all the other devices around that price point, especially something like the Anbernic 556. This would dominate the 556, completely invalidating it as an option, unless you wanted a larger 16:9 style device. The Snapdragon 865 chipset should be more powerful than the T618 chipset found in the 556. And since it performs similarly to the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro's D1100 chipset, it becomes the automatic choice for anybody who is about to purchase one of those devices. Overall, I certainly hope the Mini is around that $150 price point, but what more likely might happen, it'll be closer to $165 to $200 price point, which would be very much unfortunate. I just feel like there isn't a huge amount of competition, just not a lot of innovation happening in the $150 to $200 price point. We don't see very many hyper-competitive devices that are offering anything appreciably different from what the competitors are offering. They're all just happy offering around the same performance and similar enough, just overall design and feel. They're not trying to outcompete each other. They're all just trying to sell their devices all at the same time, trying to get you to spend money that realistically you probably shouldn't be. But what do you guys think? Are you excited with the revelation that these are coming with a Snapdragon chipset? Do you wonder when these devices should release? Because I certainly think they're probably going to end up releasing around close to the end of the year. I would love to hear what you guys think about this down below. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. All the other social media coverage down below. And last but not least, have a wonderful day.